Time to bring our meeting to order and start this work session. We have no action items.
Yeah.
So, Jenny, you got the presentation, right?
Last month.
No, it's not on the agenda, so we can't do it.
Yeah, I think it was like, oh, I just think.
We'll get to it.
Okay.
So we'll go ahead and get started for tonight's discussion. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. We're going to do a little kind of a casual conversation tonight to introduce some of the goals that staff has identified and we talk about what we want, how we want to move forward. So I just, and my apologies, our contracted planner Brandon was originally going to give this presentation and he's asked to be excused. So I'm filling in for that, but that's otherwise he will be doing the legwork on this ordinance in the future, just so you're aware. So what we're kind of proposing is an overlay zone. So I wanted to kind of go back to the basics with the definition of a zone, which we're all familiar with, but it designates a specific land use regulation on an area in the city. And an overlay zone refers to an additional layer of regulations on top of an existing zone. So we're talking about an overlay ordinance in this case. And the use of the overlay zones are to address unique features about the land that might restrict or constrict them from normal development or specific development goals that the city has set that they want to meet with an overlay zone. So we're trying to establish what goals we want. The main purpose of this meeting is to identify and establish what goals we want this ordinance to meet for this overlay zone. So our primary goal that staff is using and is already incorporated in the ordinance is to ensure and provide a balanced opportunity for home ownership in Harrisville, specifically to serve the critical and essential workers as well as first-time home buyers in Harrisville. I think I'm going to jump out of the presentation for a second. I wanted to review quickly the map that we created for the legislative open house that Weber County held right after the election. And they had asked us to identify in our cities the impact of development on just our communities and on our infrastructure, and to show what we already have in place to address both the moderate income housing requirements that the state has imposed, but also to talk about what needs to happen to make growth happen in our communities. And one of those elements, the biggest element, is infrastructure needs. So this map shows, and I'm sorry I can't zoom out any further to get the whole thing, but this map identifies all already entitled developments in Harrisville as far as through a development agreement or by right zoning on the zone, on the property, and they're already approved. So, and they're in various stages of development, right? So Ashler Cove across the street, you can see most of those homes are built. Montgomery Farms, the vast majority of those homes are built. Copperwoods here is built. So you guys are familiar with all of these. And then the key over here shows you which infrastructure the city had to kind of identify a deficiency in with those developments. So you can see sewer and storm drain are associated with many of them. And this hatching, the purple hatching over here on this side, that is our lack of secondary water in the city. So it's lacking for two reasons. Either Pineview doesn't have infrastructure in place to provide that secondary water, or it's lacking because they are outside Pineview's jurisdiction, or they're not.
Their district zone.
Their district zone, thank you. And they're not annexing any properties into Pineview's zone, their district, because of the mandates from the state to do water metering and the demands on their existing district. they don't want to expand that right now until they can get their hands around what the states told them they have to do. So where we got this data is from our facilities plans for our impact fees. So this city has to go through a process to assign an impact fee to new development. And we have to go through the facilities plans and adopt a facilities plan before we impose that impact fee. So all of these deficiencies have been identified through a facilities plan. And you can see we've included sewer, storm drain, secondary water, and then the roads. Our transportation shows the impact of those on our community. So down here at the bottom of the map, we included some demographic information, the median income of the property owners in Harrisville, and the total. Actually, this is off because this is the digital copy. We updated this copy before we printed it. It's over 1,200 homes actually with all of the developments. We put this together fairly quickly, full disclosure. So there are a couple of errors in here that we would have corrected had we had a little bit more time. But as you know, we do the best we can with the staff that we have. So jumping back to the presentation, I think it's important for us to identify and look at what impact we have and what we have coming into our community through the already entitled lots, and talk about what we want to do in the future with this ordinance, or how we as Harrisville want to see our city grow. So as we jump back into the presentation here, you can see the primary goal, and I as staff would recommend that our focus be on home ownership to maintain the 85% home ownership that we already have in our community.
We can't enforce this on prior zones until after it's built, because they're already entitled to build it under the pre-existing code.
Correct. And this isn't suggesting that we would impose any of this overlay on already entitled units. This will only be associated with new developments that are being proposed in the community. Yeah.
There's a lot of pending housing, but if we pass a new ordinance, that wouldn't affect them the same way.
Correct.
I have a quick qualifying question with this. Do we have this primary goal published anywhere on our website?
No, this is what we're talking about tonight.
Okay, just checking. I didn't know if this particular statement was anywhere, because
Nope, this is all, I pulled just 2 slides out of the actual code. We wanted to have kind of a discussion about goals before we jump into the language of the ordinance.
okay,
So
I just think that that would be a nice statement to have in our city planning.
vision,
Yeah,
like a vision statement
Yeah.
for,
It's almost like a mission statement.
yeah,
so yeah, I agree, because that's where we're at, right? In our community, we want to be careful about growth, but we also want to provide opportunities for
Right.
those that
And then
need.
make it good.
So the next slide and the last slide, these are also pinpointed in the proposed ordinance. And we can go through all of them, and then we can add to this, we can take away from this, we can do whatever we want with this. But keeping the primary goal of home ownership and providing essential workers opportunities to live in our community. When we talk about essential workers, we kind of want to define what that means too, and what that looks like for our community. It's a sad statement to say that the vast majority of our police officers cannot afford to live in our own city. Harrisville employees ought to be able to afford to live in our community. And so we want to keep that in mind as we're going through these other goals too. So we're proposing that this ordinance be specific to single family housing. And another goal of the ordinance is to create more attainable price homes for the majority of current and future Harrisville residents who desire to own a home. We want to provide opportunity for, as we were just talking about, critical and essential workers, school teachers, police officers, local government workers, things like that. And we also want to provide a variety of choices in Harrisville appropriate for residents in all different stages of life, We have often heard the term the missing middle. We talk about, communities that have maybe age restricted through their CCNRs or HOA communities. We talk about having a variety of housing options, right, in our community. And I think it's important for us to continue that.
What's the median age? Harrisville?
We don't calculate that demographic. That's not a calculation that we take.
Okay.
The health department.
We actually want to avoid any type of language in our ordinance that refers to that. We want to
Oh,
make
no, I was
sure.
just curious.
Oh, okay.
I just-
We don't want to include anything
Yeah,
specific to
No,
that in
I
our
was-
ordinance, but
no, I
yes,
wasn't-
I don't actually know that off the top of my head, but I can tell you two things about Harrisville demographics. There are a lot of blue collar workers that live in Harrisville and we have a high homeownership
Yes.
number in Harrisville. So we want to,
It's 34.
34 is the median age of Harrisville. I'd like to think that's true, but I don't think it is. So, we want to provide some development options for single family, again, detached housing where the standard lot pattern and the development standards currently are not providing attainability. So what that means is under our current lowest zone that we allow without an overlay or mixed use, the R110 zone is the smallest lots that we allow. And in the current climate that we have in our housing market, those homes are not attainable. In fact, I was attending the housing subcommittee meeting that the Weber County hosts on Monday. We had the Draper mayor, who is the president of the League of Cities and Towns there. He gave a quick presentation. He said that they just zoned a development in Draper for 10,000 square foot lots, that the homes, by the time they build the homes, those homes are selling for over $1 million.
Yeah.
So the zoning by itself is creating higher home prices and our lowest zone is not creating attainable homes. So that's what that statement is talking about. We also want to protect the architectural design, placements of building setbacks, parking. And when we say other cost related savings, I think we have to get really creative when we enter this territory. I think culturally we have in our minds what a single family home should look like. And that it has a cute little garage and it has a driveway and it has a picket fence. And I think we have to allow our minds to ebb and flow with that. Does that mean that maybe some of these homes don't have garages? Do they have a carport? Do they have, just a driveway to park in?
Not just on-street parking.
Sorry?
How about just on-street parking?
Well, we're
They
not
can just have
Chicago.
little walkways up to the houses and common space in between. We just do on-street
Hey,
parking.
we're brainstorming here.
Nathan, you do me a favor. You get a bubble over the city so it never snows and I don't have to plow it. Go ahead, park on the street all you want. All I'm saying.
I'm just thinking like the houses they've been doing in Ogden, so when I moved into the city, they were building new ones to look like the historic ones in Ogden. Those ones don't have garages, they don't have space on the lot for anything. Are we going to that where there isn't parking on the lot?
Well, we're talking about that. We're kind of opening our minds to it, right? So we're not going so far to say that there's no driveway
Right,
necessarily. But what we're saying is we want to have other related cost saving considerations.
yeah,
We don't want, and we don't have anything in our code. Let me say that as well. We don't have anything in our code that specifies they have to have garages
Right.
currently.
Yeah, plenty of streets in here, so.
And that should,
Homes that have no garages.
yeah, and that shouldn't be in our code.
Yeah.
And
right,
it should be, if a development has CCNRs that require something different, that is different than what our code says. So we want to support reductions in development costs and ongoing maintenance costs to aid significantly in reducing the cost of the homes built and we're nicknaming it CHAWS, right? The critical homeowners.
I like that.
So
I appreciate it, catchy.
provide, we also want to provide the efficient use of public services and improvements. So I think that captures the parking on the street because we want public services to be able to plow the streets.
Right.
We want to promote
And
it.
that's part of what makes
Just
a
do paved
community
parking.
good is the services that are provided as well, so.
I'd love to put pole wheels all over the city.
Well, you put them
That's
into,
just swear word you talked about.
Well, I know it is. I know it is.
well, the other thing is, I know that we're talking about detached homes, but you could save a lot in the infrastructure and maintenance costs by going up and building a, 5 or 6 story apartment building or something too. Condos in there. That saves on that cost and attracts a public transit that would service that area frequently.
And have some deed restriction on ownership so that we'd have more ownership than, yeah.
So that exists in the SAP, the station area plans that the state
Mhm.
approved.
Right,
That language exists in those
right, but if we create one, since we don't have a station in our area,
yet,
we could
I'll say,
build that
yes.
zone somewhere and put in a
So-
6 story building anticipating the station.
It's interesting that you would bring that up because we had the Wasatch Front Regional Council has a open house. And the last one we attended, we were able to nail down UTA's trustee Beth Holbrook, who we know, and
Mhm.
they had identified a parcel of land that they thought was in Ogden. It is actually in Harrisville. They didn't realize when they purchased it that it is in Harrisville and it's down North Street all the way by the tracks by the BDO.
Yep.
And so it's a 20+ acre parcel at least. And they won't use that whole parcel for their station.
Right,
They will allow development. So the station area plan will likely come into play when they do that.
Right.
We asked for a time frame, or even if the Olympics will have an impact on that, because, and she said she couldn't, of course, give us a time frame, which isn't surprising, but she did confirm that the Olympics will not affect that. But she also said that they are working on getting the front runner station in Pleasant View going again.
And let me take Jenny's one step further. So we've kind of high level identified a zone, a place.
Right,
But again, until the front runner tracks come up here and address the floodplain issue,
right. Get a pipe under the tracks.
we can't
Build.
essentially build
But we could overlay it for future.
those.
Well, and this particular, I want to keep us on track here, because this particular ordinance is single family related.
Right.
So 5-story apartments wouldn't fall under this overlay, but we
Might
can,
make more sense attainability wise.
it might. I know that in our housing discussion, there are some insurance issues, I don't know what else to call them, related to condos and ownership. And the state is trying to work through those loopholes that exist to make that attainable so that somebody could buy. It's counter productive right now for developers, and Fieldson probably can talk a lot more, yes, than me, but yes, there's too many hangups with that for ownership on condos right now, so they're trying to create that for the future. They're working through those kind of kinks.
Just heard part of an interview about that today.
Very good,
Yes, today, because it's legislative session, which means things are going to get very exciting in the next few weeks.
right,
So, and housing is at the top of everybody's list.
and thank you for bringing that up, because this is going to be talked about in legislation this
Great.
year.
Love it.
So they are already, the rumblings in the community and at all of the meetings prior to legislation, there's already 190 bills or plus that are gonna go right into the session. But at the top of the housing is talking about homeownership and attainable housing and deed restrictions and how to make this happen, right?
On single family.
On single family
Yeah.
homes. So our purpose in having this work session and having subsequent discussions and working this into an ordinance is to get once again out ahead of the changes that we see coming our direction. And the timing will be really good for us because we can implement as the legislative session goes on, we can implement those changes into our draft and be ahead of the game at the end of the day. So we'll just kind of close out the ones that are on here. Promote an attractive and safe living environment. I think that goes without saying. We want our community to remain safe and we want people to come in. We want beautiful communities. We want homes that people want to live in. And we have common goals there. So, and we want to provide and stability through the homeownership. We want to pass on the American dream to future generations where people can own their homes. And I think that there's some statistics showing that the age of people being able to purchase homes right now is just going up and up and up with the housing market. So these are suggestions. These are things that we have drafted and put into the ordinance. But we can add to those, we can take something out. So let's talk about these and.
In the fourth bullet point. Just a little bit of a language adjustment. So provide flexible development options for single family detached housing could we add something like where the current standard lot pattern and typical development standards do not provide attainability?
Otherwise,
It
the
just
goal is
reads to
to
me
not
like
provide attainability.
we're not trying to provide attainability, just as it currently reads.
But what if we use language like by right? So that means that under the current zone, if they were to try and come in and develop under what the existing zone is, they wouldn't be able to make it attainable. But if we allow it under this overlay, they can make it.
Yeah, it needs to be
attainable.
something, cause right now it has a negative connotation and it's just not super easy to understand for a layperson, which I consider myself a
Right
layperson.
now, it says provide development options for standards that do not provide attainability. So I think we need to specify where the current standards don't provide the attainability.
So we can jump forward, because after the goal discussion, we want to talk about what attainability means for Harrisville.
Right.
So we can actually, and I'm gonna.
Like our goal is to not provide.
Yes, that's what it
attainability.
sounds like. We just
Okay.
need to adjust it just a hair. Like,
The way that
I think the
goal is
statement and the purpose is great. It just contradicts itself.
Okay. That's fair. We can rewrite it or we can
Okay.
come up with
Rewrite that one.
some suggestions. Anything else? Any other comments or changes, additions,
Can we
deletions?
abbreviate it as something else? It's reminding me of the occupied zone in Seattle.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
We can name the ordinance whatever we want.
Just prefer to
We can,
change the abbreviation from Charles.
we can name it Harrisville's homeownership zone. We can put whatever
Perfect.
statement you want on it, because when it's codified, it'll go into our code where it belongs.
Charles is so catchy though, come on. It's only 4 letters, it's simple. People will be like, what is that? I could look that up and learn more.
What zone are you?
What does it remind me of?
No, yeah,
CHAZ. Look it up in the news. That's what they call the autonomous district that they created. Where the rioters took over and didn't let the police in.
okay.
Oh,
So that's what it's reminding me of.
Not much to use in it.
It's old news now, but
No, I like all the statements. I like how there are a lot of things
as
addressed.
from your positions as planning commissioners, are there other goals you want us to add to this that you think we should be focused on?
Open space.
Okay.
Provide attractive and safe living environment. What does that mean operationally?
what is attractive?
So-
Because one of the things that I've noticed, like especially with the Copperwoods, is that's so house dense. And where the kids play,
Mhm.
kind of they play in the road. Because there's hardly any grass area there at all for them.
Playground.
I agree, but I also think something like that promotes getting them to our city owned parks.
Like the one that's around the corner from the.
Oh,
They can go to Millennium
Right.
Park from there. They can walk to the park.
Right, I mean, when we grew up, that was fine.
Yes.
Parents would just say,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah,
and
no,
play.
I get it.
But now.
Now it's a little different.
Yeah, and if with parents' schedules, they're saying you're gonna have to wait till I can come with you.
There's
Kind
still
of
a lot
thing,
of kids playing at the main park.
And they should, and I hope so. I just wanna make sure as we keep things safe, but it's so interesting, because one of the things that I love about my house is the fact that I have space around my house that I can change and do all sorts of things with and beautify. And if all I walk out and I see blacktop, everywhere, I mean, how's that gonna impact kids
Well, I think we
In
have
the
to,
future?
the thing that comes to my mind with that is we have to keep in mind that we want to focus on single family homes
Mhm.
in these communities. And so there's gonna be some level of space between the homes that we're not talking townhomes specifically. We want to make sure that we're talking about the same product here. So that will be,
Right.
Do you want to say something like, and preserve open space or and preserve green space? Like what's important to you? Or both?
Yeah,
I think he just needs a definition of attractive.
okay.
I
So
was gonna suggest maybe it falls under this.
operationalize.
Attractive means
Yeah,
it's not
attractive.
subjective to whoever.
I mean, it's one thing to have a lot of housing options and people will move there because they simply need someplace to stay. But if we want to build a community that people will want to get into because it's beautiful, because it's landscaped nicely and housing projects aren't just stuffed in different places, but there's an actual. I think that's what we need to work towards.
So do you feel like the statement promote an attractive and safe living environment doesn't say enough about
Right, it's
that?
too big.
Too
So
vague?
yeah, need to add another qualifying statement to that. Do we want to say attractive? Do we want to say appealing?
Either is too vague because it's subjective to who.
It is, but I wonder if appealing is a little easier to qualify than attractive. I'm a super nerdy word person, so
And
take
mind
that for
you,
what it will.
the whole overlay zone will be governed by a master development agreement as well. So the overlay zone will require us to enter a development agreement for the idea being that there are some areas in the city that are absolutely not gonna qualify for something like this. There are gonna be spaces that it's not gonna work.
Right.
But there are going to be areas where it makes sense to allow this. And the ordinance is to get the ball rolling to say, hey, we have space in our city that could benefit from an overlay. And we have to take all of those things into consideration because we had a proposed development last month that they didn't have any open space on the whole plan.
Yeah.
And then they wanted to xeriscape it, so, then there's even no grass in between and the open spaces, so we want to make sure that we define.
Yeah.
But not specifics with percentages or anything like that,
Yeah.
right? Because it's an overlay zone.
Single family detached housing, do manufactured home communities, trailer parks fit in that?
So the single family dwelling is defined in our code of what's required for
Right.
that. I suppose.
Now, this is the development agreement with a builder developer.
Well, this is just for the ordinance.
Yeah, an
I'm
ordinance.
trying to think of
We put
if
this
there's
ordinance
anything else in our code that would
This
prohibit
could
that.
incentivize trailer parks, which would provide attainable housing. They're typically cheaper. They're on smaller lots.
Theoretically, they're cheaper.
But it wouldn't be by right, right? It's not by rights. This isn't
Yeah.
creating a zone that says
No,
if
it's
you
just
meet these
creating an
things.
overlay that allows it and.
So there would
other
still
areas.
be, but potentially, I imagine, I know that the state is very interested in the prefabricated homes.
Right.
And they've had a lot of discussion on what that looks like. And,
Well, there's more options for modular building than there ever have been.
right. And so I guess I couldn't say that it isn't possible with this overlay, but as far as a developer coming in here and doing it by right, it's an overlay zone, so we would have a development agreement, there would be some negotiation there, yes.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good question, and I think when we get further into the ordinance, we can show you how that can be controlled, for lack of a better word there.
Get incentivized too.
Again, you know, the manufactured home is totally different than, we say, a trailer.
Yep.
They've been rebranded, they're called tiny homes now.
Right,
And those are different too.
again,
We could do a tiny home community, but that's not,
please,
they don't have to say attachments.
please no.
With
I
on
love
street
some of them.
parking,
They have,
I love some of them.
no, the homes themselves.
Yeah.
Where it comes into an issue for myself or the city is the amount of density in such a constricted area than infrastructure.
Oh, I totally agree.
yeah,
So essentially, if we've got,
but we gotta get more dense at some point.
Are we ready to
Very
dive,
much so.
are we ready to dive past the goals, cause we can
Yes.
talk about all of these other things as
Yeah.
well?
Yes.
Okay, so let's jump into the actual draft. And I'm gonna invite Fieldstone to come up to the table for this portion of the conversation and discussion here, so that I don't miss anything. This is where we wanna dive into what we have in, and again, this is all proposed. This is, we wanna customize this to meet Harrisville's needs, and we wanna make sure that everything in this ordinance aligns with those goals. So you'll find the goals in here
Okay.
as we go through it.
We worked with a couple of cities on things like this and gone to city council meetings just like last night on one. And the idea was kind of like, hey, set these goals and then model the ordinance around it. So the ordinance that we have here is kind of modeled around the goals that you guys have just reviewed, but maybe there are different goals that might change as thus the work session, right?
I think,
But I think this is gonna be awesome.
let me introduce you really quick.
I'm
'cause I
sorry,
realize
I'm
I
sorry.
know- No, I know who you guys are, but this is Randy and Jason. You've met Jason before. He's given a presentation to the planning commission, and this is Randy. And I should specify too, that we've already worked through this draft ordinance and we've catered it to Harrisville. So you're not seeing something that
Yeah.
is,
Statewide.
we're not statewide by any means, but it's also not something that is being presented in another city that we've worked through this whole ordinance and we've adapted it to what the staff feels like represents Harrisville.
Okay.
But we can certainly make additional changes to it, and we would love your input on all of it. So I mentioned earlier that we kind of wanna define critical and essential workers, what that means.
Should we include neighboring cities like North Ogden and such too, to incentivize people who are employed in North Ogden or schools outside? For example, we don't have a high school in Harrisville, but we might want high school teachers to be included in teachers. Or,
So we are giving actually, in the language in the ordinance, we're giving a higher priority to Harrisville residents or employees
right,
Employees of the city.
of the city.
okay,
But certainly, it's up to you if you wanted to, we were trying to keep it kind of to
Right.
protect
But
Harrisville, but if you wanna
if
broaden
we have
that.
the North Ogden cops living here, maybe they'll be incentivized to switch to.
Is this like, where's the motivation for this coming other than general goodwill? I'm just curious, like, is this we all need to do this in various municipalities? Because I know a lot of people that specifically do not want to work where they live.
Mhm.
Like a lot. Teachers do not want to work in the neighborhood where they live. And just,
Don't either, cause then they deal with crime.
anyway, so I'm just saying, I'm just curious on the motivation. I have not lived here for 20 years. Is this something that is like bringing us into compliance, or is it a general gesture of goodwill?
This is a general gesture of goodwill.
Okay,
That's exactly right.
okay, that's great. Okay, got it. We want them to have the option to live where they choose. That doesn't mean that they have to drive to Tremont to afford a
I
house.
think it's good too, cause it shows like, you know, we got a pretty good idea how much all those people make in any of those
Yes.
jobs, and it shows like. We want a city that these people, you know, someone who works
That's
in retail can
affordable for
afford,
those people.
Yeah,
you know, so it gives a good idea, like this is the. the salary one.
It's only specific to Harrisville city employees, but all the other sectors,
Yeah,
it's general.
okay,
So like you were saying,
so,
Police
yeah,
officers,
police officers from other
teachers,
cities.
nurses.
But me-
Well, before the highlighted part, it's persons who are actively employed within the Harrisville city boundary at those jobs that are more general.
yeah, so is that essential
So
for
that's
this
why I
statement?
said,
So, oh, yeah, that's,
before the highlighted part, if we put within Harrisville city and 2 miles outside of
Or
it
and
something.
surrounding areas even.
Well, I wouldn't put surround, we need to define how far,
drop that part and just go
just to,
persons who
Employed
are
within,
employees of Harrisville City and on and on,
Yeah.
and just kind of drop that first part.
well, yeah,
so
I also don't want to imply that,
I'd put a 1 or 2 mile boundary on that, so that way it still is local to our area, but not necessarily just within Harrisville. 'Cause I do
but
want
then
to
it
incentivize-
sounds like there's a restriction.
Well, there is a restriction,
But we can't
Within the
say, oh,
city.
you don't live in Harrisville, you're not allowed to buy this
well,
house.
no, it's,
I'm just saying, lay people will read that.
Yeah, there's a piece of the ordinance later that refers back to this.
Okay,
That creates some restriction, but not entirely, for a short period of time. They basically are getting priority. But they
are we
don't-
allowed to do
it's
that?
like
Yes.
first in line.
yes, it's called deed restriction, but it allows it to be
I didn't know
more
that particular
affordable
thing
for,
was legal though. I know
Yeah.
that's some deed restrictions, but,
Yeah.
yeah.
oh, that's
And,
still
and I think
interesting
that
to
there
me.
are people that want to live in Harrisville.
Yeah.
And they can't, and they may not now, right?
Yeah.
It's sad that I don't live in Harrisville now, or I don't have a job in Harrisville, but I want to live in Harrisville.
Yeah.
So we put it in adjacent cities. So only those cities that directly touch it, so we can incentivize employees in these areas to move here.
Yeah, cause let's say, for instance, the Pleasant View ER, which generally has, nobody really works there full-time. They rove to lots of different facilities. It is 1 block outside of the Harrisville boundary. So that would be an adjacent situation.
Exactly,
Yeah, we
to
can,
include that, because there are a lot of people in those areas that might work just across the street from Harrisville and then not qualify because they're not actively employed within the Harrisville city boundary.
Are we adjacent to 5?
Ogden, North Ogden, Pleasant View, Far West,
Marriott Sladeville?
we actually
touch
don't.
Marriott
Oh, we don't hit them at all?
Because the Ogden city goes in between us and them.
Oh, that's right, there's that
The
little,
fairgrounds
oh,
and
yep,
the
yep.
And I would
townhomes
say-
and apartments on the.
I thought there was a
south side of
permanent
Harrisville Road.
At Weaver County.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cause that's Ogden, which is ridiculous, cause it's Ogden School District, which then
Yes.
has to bus them around the
Which is a
fairgrounds and
whole
the.
other issue for another meeting.
So we're gonna move on from that. So we wanna broaden this statement about, okay?
There's
then-
the city and adjacent cities.
Yeah,
Suggest-
Anything else you wanna change about that
no, I
definition?
think it's great. I like the,
All the other
Yeah.
things we've listed, you're good with? Any,
Yeah.
any other
You don't want
suggestions?
to kick
Okay,
out any of those people.
okay. So a legitimate offer means qualified offer to purchase a residential unit. And the ability to do that. A Harrisville resident means a person who's lived in the boundaries for 12 months, a year.
Consecutive.
You wanna add consecutive? It says.
It
each
does
of
more
the
than
past
that.
12
that's
months.
probably better.
That's considered.
Okay.
Yeah,
Owner occupied means the owner of the residential unit lives there or their immediate family member. A hardship is defined as a medical emergency, loss of employment or significant loss of income, divorce, relocation, military service, religious, or death of a spouse or co-owner. In the event of a hardship, it does say that they'll be allowed an exemption to that owner occupancy requirement.
do we need to
We
call
can-
that the period of time?
Just gonna say, we can.
Okay. I don't know.
I think
I think
might-
we
I
had
think it
some
does.
initial language, does, well.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
let's
these are
jump
just
down.
definitions.
It is a
That's right, sorry.
Yeah, I
definition.
was gonna say, I think we defined how long,
Okay,
and then we added. This recently, the minor revision, a modification or an adjustment to an approved subdivision plan or associated documents. That doesn't substantially alter the original intent or design. I'll let you read it. And tell me if you have any.
Just a question of clarification. Would this be every home in the overlay zone, or would this be a certain amount of deed restricted?
It's contemplated as every.
Okay, I just,
It could be a small, it's a good question as I think about it, right? Because you might have like a bigger master plan, you're gonna do some of this. So it's a good question, but it's contemplated as, you know, you find a piece of land and make a subdivision and
right,
it's not 500 acres, right?
right,
But you can go get in 50 homes or something. And
right.
So
Essentially-
that's kind of.
Essentially like, you know, like, okay, say, you know, as we have it, we like to deal in 30 lot
Phases.
phases. So phase one could fall into this and have all those homes deed restricted, but maybe phase two doesn't.
Depends on where the overlay
Okay,
reaches.
that's, I just wanted to clarify that. I'm trying to,
Because
I know
the way the document's written is the council will have the authority, the ability, the discretion to dictate however much of
Yes.
that,
Yes.
right?
Basically.
But it's contemplated as, the
Yeah.
purpose is to get to the price,
Yes.
you've got to deed restrict to
Mhm.
get there.
yes,
To allow these options.
Yeah.
Okay, so we good with those definitions?
Yes.
Okay,
Just extending that first one.
so
Yeah, we can do it.
this, this is where we took our goal from. Is the developments that offer a new approach to housing. So I'll let you read through that and then let me know your feedback on it. Yeah,
I like it.
okay.
Okay, what do we mean by diverse and inclusive?
Lots of
Both of those.
people allow-
Exactly how it's
that DEI?
No, because this is not education or business or.
And it's not forcing it on anyone, it's just allowing everybody in.
Yeah.
Not pricing them out or saying they can't live
To
here
me, the
because
diversity
they're.
is socioeconomic diversity,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
race.
It allows people who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford the neighborhood to live there.
Yeah.
By adjusting the price for them.
Yes, I.
Okay. Any other comments on this statement?
Would love to have read through this before we came.
That's okay, we're doing it together.
Sorry, it wasn't ready until this afternoon. That's what we're doing this work, but this is, let me just rest assured, this is certainly not the only work session we can
Yeah.
have, that's not the only conversation we can have. This is just the beginning
Good,
of the look at it.
right,
So you can take
thank you.
it
Is it-
home and.
Yeah, I find that I'm operating on an old penny and process. And so my brain doesn't work as fast as Nathan's.
DOS, you know DOS?
It just takes me, it just takes me a little bit of time to work through stuff.
So in this next section, do we want to just put an overlay on the general plan, or do we want to allow the city council to amend it at will? In that second sentence. I
So-
prefer it to be set.
Oh, the at the discretion of the
Yes.
city council part?
Yeah, if we just put it in a set place and then it's there. Rather than allowing the city council in the ordinance to put it everywhere.
I don't know if it would need to be. I don't know, I feel like we maybe need to meet in the middle of what you just said.
Because otherwise it's not really, we're putting an overlay there, it's just we have the ability to put the overlay everywhere.
Well, that's kind of the intent, is to put the overlay everywhere.
To have the ability.
To have the ability to do it.
so.
Right,
If-
rather than just
if
putting
we-
it on half the city and saying this section.
If we do, I think if I'm understanding where you're coming from, if we do that, then we're creating a new zone versus an
Creating
overlay.
Overlay zone, but like the mixed use overlay zone is only in certain sections of the city.
Oh, I see. So you would like to
So I wanna
identify areas
the
in the
sections
city,
of
so
the
you
city
wanna
as
add
part
an,
of the ordinance
so maybe we add an exhibit,
to
a
show where
map
that is.
exhibit
Yes.
where there are areas.
Yes, So we can define those areas as we craft the ordinance, but then have those set rather than having the second sentence here in the ordinance that says the city council can put it everywhere. So that way we have it defined, so people going in know these parts of
is
the city
eligible or
are there and these other parts, it wouldn't work.
I guess my follow-up question to that would be, what areas of the city would we not want to allow this?
I don't know right now, I'm just,
Okay,
I just
okay,
don't want the city
all right.
council to be able to put it development by development and have a hodgepodge of overlay zones. Rather than one continuous stretch that, snakes through the whole city somewhere.
Which I get what you're saying and I agree, but where we're coming from as a city and what we're seeing is you're gonna have homes that are currently A1,
Right,
right? And then they have 5 acres, the home's gonna come down. Everybody around them's still A1.
right,
How are we gonna overlay just that one
unless we have
after
it.
the fact?
Right.
Yes, but before, like, look at our future zoning map.
Right.
There's pretty good indication where mixed use should fall, because especially with the commercial. A commercial level.
If we have the station, we're gonna have an overlay over that open space.
Yes,
But I like what you said,
But
Jenny,
it
earlier
will be-
about
but that will have to
the
be,
term of eligibility, like saying this would be eligible for an
Yes.
overlay. We're not saying it has to go here or it has to go here, but it would be eligible. I think that might be a good way to meet in the middle.
You can apply for it.
yes.
The planning commission reviews it, gives recommendation, the council reviews it and says, this is not the right place.
Yeah.
Or this is
Don't
okay.
put it over Walmart. Just in case that redevelops and they wanna put housing there and say, this is going to be your next trailer park there or something.
Speaking of, right.
Let me offer just one additional
Some
thought there,
sections,
to the diversity conversation,
Mhm.
right? I don't think, but this is just a thought, right? I don't think that the hodgepodge, right, like putting these communities around the community in lots of different areas is hodgepodge. It actually creates diversity.
Mhm.
And that comes from looking at all the options and then making a decision, does it make sense here? Versus narrowing it to, nah, we're just gonna decide up front whether it makes sense or not.
Yeah.
I would recommend being a little more open and allowing the conversation to happen through the process that's outlined and just narrowing.
Yeah.
And I think to that same point, I think there's language later on in the ordinance that kind of
Guides that.
guides that. Yeah, that's the best word for it. Guides it, because we are going to require the consideration of the surrounding areas when we
Right.
identify this.
Yeah.
This possibility.
I've heard this term and I love it, gentle density. And instead of like, we're gonna start with our least dense and we're gonna move into our most dense. And this is traffic packed and these guys have the roads to themselves and. But gentle density and like little of this here, a little of this there and like the density spread. And I love that idea.
Yeah, I read another term the other day that I love too, that was left density all the way out of the discussion. I'm gonna
Yeah,
look
everybody
it up
hates the
for
D
you.
word, right?
Yes, because it does have negative connotations. I'm going to find it while you're
Okay.
going, because I'll bring it up in a second.
So here, we're just jumping into the goals, what we just discussed.
Oh, yes.
So that's
Great.
just cut and pasted from, the slide is literally cut and pasted from this. So
Mhm.
we wanted some language change to the 4th bullet point, and we wanted to maybe have a little bit more definition on the attractive and safe living environment. Is that correct? Is that our follow-up on those?
Yep.
Okay. So now we're gonna dive into a little bit more about the description, allowed uses, and maybe this will kind of circle back to some of these discussion points that we've had earlier. So we want to keep in mind the goal of the ordinance, and the goal is to offer attainable housing, right? And we're gonna do that by incorporating price adjusting factors into the development. And then you'll see our goal right there.
Mhm.
So the developments must be planned and designed and coordinated and unified and the home sale price driving the design strategy. So maybe Jason, do you want to touch on that really quick on how the home sale price drives the design strategy for us?
Yeah, happy to. If you recall, I think all of you were in the presentation that I made a while back, right, where we talked about, we used a case study of an actual development that Fieldstone has done, where we said, in a particular city down south, we did 30-acre lots, right? Even though it actually made more sense to do something, more attainable / affordable. And what we did is we just said that, look, we're building this right now at $833,000 on average for these homes. And we just took that subdivision and looked at it and said, what if all we did was draw a lot line down the middle? And we were more efficient because we used the same infrastructure to service the homes within that community. And what we found through that exercise, and we've seen in lots of different areas, is that when you more efficiently use the land first, you focus on the land, and the price of the land is the biggest component of the cost structure in building a home, and the piece that we can influence the most. In that particular case, we could drive down the price of the home and keeping the home exactly the same size, which also is possible. We just build lots so big that that we can fit 2 homes on every lot, but we just don't, because that was the way we've been doing things. But in that case, we can drive down the price by $170,000. Now, that's significant, because if we tried to attack any other component of the home, right, like don't do double vanities, right, just do one sink in the master bathroom. Formica versus granite or whatever, we could drive down the cost by only tens of thousands, right?
Yeah.
But not hundreds of thousands. And what we need right now in our market, which I pulled the data from the MLS for Harrisville, that I'm happy to share with you because I think it's really interesting. But in that case, when we do that first, we get the biggest significant improvement in the price of the home. The second consideration is then the square footage of the home. So then we applied that. And when we applied square footage, we went from a 2,600 finished square foot, right, to a 1,900 finished square foot. We went from $170,000 savings to $256,000 savings. So just by that one strategy of drawing that lot line down the middle of that lot, and just adding laterals in cost, we added a little bit of cost for those extra set of laterals, right? All of a sudden, we instantly went to a $570,000 home, which is almost to the median home price, but we're still not there, right? But that's starting at a pretty large lot and a pretty significant dollar amount. When you look at it that way, and that's what this ordinance was designed to do, was look at how can we be more efficient about the land cost in the equation. That's where you get the biggest bang for the buck. On the housing information, I pulled today's active listings in Harrisville. And I took out the high end and the low end, just so I took the median of the median. So you had one house that was listed for 300,000, and you had 2 over $1 million. But I just took those out of the equation just to really find where Harrisville really is for the majority of what they have. You only have, other than those 3, you have 14 active listings in your city. And the median home price of those 14 active listings, resale and new construction, is $699,000. That's what you're really looking at for your housing stock right now. Then I went and I said, okay, well, let's just look at new housing stock, because that's our path forward to creating homeownership opportunities for more people, right? And on new construction, you have 8. And of those 8, the average median price is $728,000. And you're right, most of them come from.
Yeah.
Your large lot.
Yeah.
That's driven by your large lots.
So, and to back Jason up, I could take you on a drive to 2 subdivisions. could go drive Ashland, with the bigger lots, bigger houses.
Mhm.
And yes, they're still just building, but there's a few that they're just sitting there vacant.
Mhm.
Or I take you to Montgomery Farms. That they're all built out and they're all lived in,
Mhm.
smaller lots,
10,000 square foot lot,
Right.
15,000 square
Yep.
foot.
Right.
lots.
smaller
What's the
homes,
difference between those two?
the price point.
Right.
What's interesting about that is, yeah, I mean, if land price is such a big driver, that even when you just take it down a little bit, right, it
Yeah.
affects the cost of the house.
Well, we saw a huge upswing in that, 7 to 10 years ago, like, when I bought a house 7 years ago in Harrisville. So we were looking at that and we're like, we were 50-50, new construction versus existing home. And we were looking at that and we were watching ourselves by the month getting priced out of new construction because the costs were skyrocketing for land. So that totally makes sense. So that's, people get so caught up in all their materials and their finishes. You're like, well, if you started with a half-acre lot that cost $500,000 or more, depending on where it is, that's, it's just crazy, so.
Now, one other point I wanna make is I think it's important to discuss that, and for sure, you as a city, as you think about how do we provide services and how do we get the money to provide those services? In the scenario that I was talking about in our case study, right? On that 3rd-acre lot, the taxable value is $833,000, right? But when I take $250,000 out of the price of the home, right? And I have 2 homes on that same 3rd-acre lot. I now have 2 homes worth $570,000, so I have $1.2 million of taxable value.
Yeah.
So when you're out trying to do your public works thing, right, that same street frontage, right, you now have the ability to collect more taxes per resident.
You also have to do the traffic, because now there's 2 families living there.
There's always a trade-off, right?
Yeah.
Twice the shoppers.
Right, but you have, yeah, there's trade-off on
Like
both
the angry
sides, but you
residents.
really.
But you're relieving a
looking at-
tax burden on the homeowner as well, if you.
True.
Yeah, and you just put 2 families in your community
Yeah.
who can now afford to home.
Yes.
Yeah.
I won't say that there's not ever a negative, but there are more positives than negatives when you understand really the economics of how something like this could work.
Right.
No, I
And just
think you're
pointing
right.
out that your tax dollars for the road is gonna be spent more on the road because it's gonna get more wear. So
And
you're
it's
just
the same,
gonna
it's the
go
same
into
road,
it.
it's more tax dollars for the same amount of road and the same amount of water pipe and the
Right.
same amount
Yep.
of sewer pipe.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just a little more wear and tear, so it goes a little faster.
So when you talk about making these properties smaller, is there an ideal?
Well, I think that's what, so we were just getting into like what Jenny said to go, how target price.
Even
Okay.
sub 10,000, is that what we're talking about is?
So,
Little under
so I
that.
think there's an important thing to consider. And that is, you don't want, even though I used in my example, cutting the lot in half. What you really want to do is you want to decide what's our goal for price point. And then solve for what that takes, because it might not need to be, if your goal is just to have attainable housing, but not affordable housing. Your lot can be bigger, but you can drop, you can drop the price of that home. If you say, no, we really want to go toward a true starter home, it might be more density in order to get there. But the key is, what's the price of the homes we want in our community that will bring these groups that we've just identified, these, critical and essential worker types that will bring to our community where they can thrive and own a home and gain equity and essentially contribute to your community, right? That's gotta be part of your strategy, and it's gotta be the biggest part of your strategy, because then you can identify what to do next.
Yeah.
It's not a density thing, it's actually a price point.
I agree with that.
Well, I hear what you're saying. And on the other hand, if we were to do something like that, say, our price point's $350,000. We want a house like that. How many people still can't even afford that?
You go with that
And-
trailer
and-
park target 100,000.
No, we don't have a trailer park.
They've got airports, they've got smaller lots, they've got
Yeah.
open space, they say.
They're not safe, that's a whole thing.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
yes, anyway.
Chad, but you can't get to those lower
Oh, sorry,
points
did you
if you go far enough.
Well,
That's just-
I'm just trying to think through it in my mind, because it seems to me that Harrisville needs to have a vision first of how we want the community to look. And that everything flows downstream from that vision. Including the types of houses we put in, the size of the lots, the quality of the houses. Because what it sounds to me like is that, yeah, we can offer you a Porsche, but you only get one seat. You know, because we're essentially stripping these houses, we're stripping the space, but we're also putting in. We may do the first floor, but the whole basement is totally undone. And it's interesting. I really appreciate the discussion, honestly. It's just helping me think through this, sorry.
No, I like how you're thinking about it. Sometimes, like, cause I get like that too, like, oh, I wouldn't live in this, I wouldn't. But then, like, oh, but it's not for me, right? I kind of had to deal with that. And then I think, well, what's the alternative? Do we keep the family in an apartment? And have to move every year because the rent went up?
I look at our
I get that,
nieces and
so-
nephews and younger siblings that are all buying their first homes or hoping to do so in the next couple of years. And it's been painful. There have been tears, there have been lots of things. They're doing everything that they can to scrape money together to spend $350,000 to $450,000 on a 2-bedroom townhouse. And that's hard to see. So they also do not care at this phase of their lives about having a large yard, like a lot of people do in different demographics, because they know I might live there for 5 to 10 years, but those are also the years that I'm either finishing school or starting my family or whatever. I don't have time to maintain that. So I'm happy to pay a little bit to my HOA or whatever the case may be to maintain that green space. There's a park down the street. Some of them only have 1 car, some of them have 2. So some of those ideals that some of us want, like I bought my house so I could have more yard, and I'm going to want that for a long time.
Right.
But I have siblings and nieces and nephews in this county that don't want any of those things.
And the ultimate way to get those smaller lots is to go to townhomes where you're sharing a wall. And so you get that section of yard, but we're still not getting the affordability out of that.
Right, but that's why we want these single detached homes where they can have kind of the best of all the worlds. And we want them to be affordable. We want to see more young families. Like I watched a young family lose a house in my neighborhood 2 years ago because an empty nester couple coming from out of state wanted to be closer to their grandkids, and they had the ability to get in this massive price war. And it was sad for us to see that happen. Not that they're not wonderful people, but we have a lot of people that are older, middle-aged, retired, that are not leaving their homes to create that natural turnover to get young families in. And so our young families are getting pushed further and further out of our community, and we don't want that.
Well, you're right about that also, on the housing stock side of it, right? There are people like my parents, right, who live in Layton, who their house is now too big for them. And when we create housing options, right, where they can downsize, right now, the downsize is not an option.
Yeah,
Right, because we're only creating housing that is too expensive, so you
Yeah.
can't trade.
Right.
Right, so you're stuck.
Mhm.
So again, we have to increase supply significantly, and we have to create diverse housing types, so you can create the movement, so that they'll move out of their bigger home
Mhm.
to a smaller home to make room for the family who needs to
Yeah.
move up to a bigger home. It's a problem at every level.
It is.
But the
Smallest
biggest
square footage we could go,
biggest
this
level
is
is in your
downsizing.
first time home category,
Mhm.
your starter home.
It's the steps to get up to.
That is
Yeah.
an area where we have our biggest housing
range.
challenge.
Deficit.
Yes,
But if we're building starter homes too big for the people downsizing, then they're still not going to downsize.
But that's what I'm saying, that's what's happening.
Yeah,
yeah,
We
we want,
are actually doing
my
that.
we wanna
parents
have these
moved into
12 to
a bigger
1,500,
house when
maybe
they should have
18
downsized.
homes.
Yes, right.
So,
that's.
So
We've designed some that.
did I answer
I-
what you
yeah.
wanted me to?
Yeah,
You know,
so-
850.
The other interesting thing that I'm noting is that there are multiple families moving into the same house.
Yes,
I'm seeing that
You
now.
use kids in the basement,
No,
or
there's
not even school generations.
Two different families.
there's
Got
one down
out-
the street that has 2 or 3 families in there. They're just a couple, they don't have kids, but there's multiple households.
Yeah, I can
That's
see that.
called necessity.
yes,
And to conversations that we have had prior to this discussion, if the housing stock doesn't increase and we don't get more homes available, that we will see more and more of that.
Yes,
And when you
Right.
talk from a density perspective, it's the same amount of people in the same amount of space. They're just living separately.
Yeah.
When you have 2 or 3 families stacked in a 3,000 square foot home, or you have them living in 1,000 square foot each, it's the same density, but
Mhm.
they have equity, homeownership, and an opportunity for future growth.
Right.
If they all 3 own a home versus one family owns the home and rents to the other 2.
Mhm.
And so we have to really broaden our perspective of what we're looking at. And I appreciate where you're going with the vision statement, because we want to make sure in whatever we create here in the ordinance, that we don't lose track of what the goal is.
right.
But I
'Cause-
think when we talk about vision, we have to
That
remove
vision
our
has to, right, that
biases.
vision has to be, right.
And
Right enough to
and
include
this-
what we're talking about here, which is wonderful, but see, what I'm afraid of is that. Based on what you said, that the vision gets lost in favor of the diversity, because the diversity comes in, we do whatever is needed at the time that it's needed. You know what I'm saying? Which could cause us to lose track of our vision statement. I just wanna make sure that we don't lose Harrisville as we're doing this.
Yeah.
You know, as we move forward,
Absolutely.
because I am all for the diversity, I am all for the different, everything, I'm all for that.
But and my response to that, I wholeheartedly agree, we don't want to lose Harrisville, but my response would be, we are, because our kids are leaving.
Yeah.
And
Right.
my family's a multi-generational Harrisville family.
Right.
You know, my father-in-law grew up in Harrisville, my husband grew up in Harrisville, my children grew up in Harrisville, and my kids could not afford to live in
Right.
Harrisville.
I
There
can't
were no
afford my
options.
house if I was gonna buy it right now,
And so
literally.
I 100% agree with your vision on that, Chad, and I think that because we don't have opportunity to create other housing options, we are forcing that next generation to go elsewhere.
Can I frame that in another way too, that I was just thinking while you were talking? I believe if we allow this flexibility and broaden our vision, it contributes to healthy diversity, which allows us to maintain our vision. And it can become a very functional circle.
We want
Really?
to keep it a functional
Yeah.
circle though, is what you're saying, Chad. You want to make sure that Harrisville's still
Right.
rooted
Right,
in
'cause-
where we
right,
started.
right.
You know, I like to rearrange my Legos. I'm gonna bring that up a lot. This is one of those things for me.
Okay, good.
Like
What I
where,
like about this part of the discussion too, and I'll add to it, and that is without addressing it Harrisville's way, right, which is write your ordinance, try to get it into your system and start creating the housing,
Mhm.
is that if you lose control to the state,
That's right,
Yeah.
it'll never be Harrisville,
right,
right? So, and those conversations at the state level are real.
Mhm.
And so moving quickly, which I know Jenny wants to do with this and showing the state,
yeah,
right, that no.
We got
We
it.
hear it. We're gonna deal with it here in our community is huge for you.
oh, totally,
And
getting ahead of the wave.
We are, yes, we are completely trying to get ahead of the wave
Yeah.
and just to kind of go back to that map that we're touching on.
1,200 units.
Yeah, we have 1,200 units on here, but the state has actually sent this out. The league has sent our map out saying, please, cities, identify this in your own communities, because we want the legislators to know. Harrisville, we're 2.7 miles in square miles, and we have 1,200 entitled units. We don't want to lose control of the developments that are coming down. We don't want to be told how our city is going to look by the state.
Right.
We have to address all of these deficiencies that are on this map
Right.
to allow our city to grow.
In the
you're
right.
not, maybe you're not considering, they are not considering the impact of that so much. And by adopting an ordinance that allows us to define what we want the vision to look like,
Exactly.
we're essentially saying, look, we know, back off
Yeah.
is the best way to say
Yeah.
it. So,
And the ordinance is-
Price.
It's intentionally broad enough to not be bound geographically.
Right.
So you can apply it differently here than you would apply it there, but use the same ordinance to keep the character of Harrisville.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah.
so maybe let's go a little bit for the sake of time too, but I love our discussion though, because I think that it's gonna keep us on track for creating a good ordinance, but I wanna make sure that you understand. And we don't have to go through every section. We can send this out, you can review it, we can
Thank
talk
you.
about it again.
That would be.
But let's just go through what sections we've included in the ordinance,
sounds good.
okay? So that you know what the content of the ordinance. So for allowed uses, we've defined this as a variety, excuse me, I'm losing my ability, of single-family detached residential types. That's what we've defined allowed use as.
Yes.
Does
So
that include ADUs?
this would not,
No.
well, it
So
doesn't
no.
include ADUs. That's a whole nother conversation that we'll have, because that's also coming down from the
Well,
legislation.
that would help with the affordability too, if you had a house where you could add an ADU into it. That would make it that
And-
much more affordable.
And I suppose that could be some kind of a consideration as far as diversity
It would
and
depend
stock
on
and,
the size of your house and whether you have room
lot
for an
size,
ADU.
yeah, right.
Right. Or if we put that in to say, every house in this half of the city gets an ADU capable area in it.
well,
I think
I
without
mean, I
saying
know that's kind of
that they,
specific with the form-based code, but it would allow that affordability to be built in.
because currently what our ordinances allow are internal,
Right. And we
and not
could,
external.
right, but we
That's
could
all of
put,
Harrisville, right?
if
all
you're
of
building a new house, put an internal ADU capable space.
There's nothing in this ordinance that would prohibit that. from
Yeah, that's already
happening.
allowed.
I just think that might be a.
Because
And
they-
you're right
there's
on.
nothing in there that
We-
would
Most of our
prohibit
communities
single-family
have,
home.
and people
Yeah, but
love
we
it.
do that.
The house
Sing-
is designed
so-
for it.
Yeah, single-family homes allow for an internal accessory dwelling
Right.
unit, and there's nothing in this ordinance that would prohibit that.
You know,
We're using the terminology, single-family detached residential, because that's,
where you want to stay for
Yeah.
the city employees.
we don't want it to include multifamily
Right.
townhomes. We're specifically trying to define.
Well, and I,
So this language, yeah, we need to, go ahead.
well, just to, I think, put a button on that for a second, and that is.
Okay,
If we're going for affordability, right? Increasing the cost of the home to include the ADU component increases the cost.
Right.
So that's something that you consider after the fact.
Yeah.
And not as a strategy, but it might become one. It just, I don't think you'd want to add anything here to do that. It will come naturally if it actually is an affordable component. But I would guess based on what you need to
It
do.
would increase the.
You have
initial
to,
cost,
you
but-
set your price, right? And it's all gonna depend on that.
Okay, so you say attached may be considered where they provide attainable target price homeownership opportunities in areas where land constraints prevent single-family detached homes.
Where do land constraints prevent single-family detached homes?
It might be adjacent to this, overlay, right, that you talked about for transit-oriented development, right? It might only be an acre in size, but you still want that housing type.
Gotcha.
That's an
But an
example
acre
where you might
doesn't
consider it, but
prevent
it's not
Detached
driving.
home.
Okay.
it's not the intent,
On the Harrisville Mountain where there's all that grade.
right?
I just don't think there's any land that would prevent a detached home. It would
Well-
be fewer homes, but you could still do detached homes.
And I think it's,
So the primary
It
goal
just
is
says considered.
detached.
yeah,
But I think again, to Jason's point, it's what goal are we trying to get to?
Yeah.
Because it may be that, yeah, let's be honest,
Condos.
that townhouses are the only thing that's affordable
Yeah.
in
Or
the
maybe
market.
we even want
It is
to
a
do a
10 flex
duplex or a
condos, like,
triplex.
it
Yeah.
just fits in the
Yeah.
space.
Okay.
We only have 5-story condo.
So then we've got the requirements for the critical home ownership, and this might warrant a little bit more discussion in some
More
of this.
discussion probably.
So this is where you were talking about maybe allowed at the discretion of the city council.
Yep.
Certainly an option is to try to define the,
To find the overlay.
but I will say as feedback from the mixed use, just from our experience with the mixed use map, it hasn't prevented it from happening.
Right,
It
And it doesn't
just happens a
prevent us
different
from-
way.
right.
So we still have developments like Oak Hollow or Summit Views.
Right.
Or not Summit Views, that was mixed use.
In the overlay.
Harrisville Fields, excuse me. We still have other developments that have come in under master development agreements to make it happen. So I just want to be mindful of that we can do our due diligence and we can do the best that we can to put parameters around where we would like this to happen. But one of my feedback things to the state when we were meeting with them, as I said, is so hard as city staff to be pitted against our existing residents in saying, we have to meet your moderate income housing needs through development agreements because we don't have any by right zoning that meets that. We don't have anything in our code that would allow us to build moderate income housing.
Right,
And so to meet those, you're forcing us to go outside of our code to have that happen, and
So
you're
now
pitting
we're
us
code in.
against, and in a level beyond, I mean, it's our job as staffers to take it, right? But then you put the planning commissioners and ultimately the city council members in the position where they're being forced to make these decisions because there's a disconnect between what the residents understand and what the city council members, planning commissioners and staff understand that needs to happen.
right.
So I just want to throw that out there when we're talking about where we want to allow this in the city, whether we want to create a map to accompany this. Certainly, those are
That
options.
helps with the expectations of people to understand that these are possibilities in the area, like the mixed use zone is done. To say, these are areas where that sort of development can take place and.
But it certainly just doesn't prevent it from happening. And
Right.
so we're trying to kind of get our hands around it and say, well, let's do it this,
discourage
and there
the
are
city
things,
council from doing that by
that-
allowing the ordinance to
well, and
specify an area, so that way they can say. Encouraged in this area, possible, but not encouraged in the others.
well, hopefully there's enough carrots in this that we will want to have, and that's where we're diving into this next section. So we'll kind of talk about the qualifying districts. Certainly, we can talk about creating a map. We can get our engineer involved in defining those areas as well.
Okay.
And the key word for us in these next discussion items are going to be what the target price goals are for the city. Because that's all gonna fall under,
You know, and if we
This
put it at
section.
100,000, we're going to end up with trailer parks rather than
You actually.
anything else.
I don't think you can
No.
build trailers.
You can't, no.
Yeah.
Not with the land.
Not with
Not the
the,
land.
not the land and the
No.
infrastructure.
Yeah.
so. So we can sidetrack and we can talk about that target price for a little bit, or we can just continue through the ordinance. It's up to you.
Let's just continue through
Okay.
for
I
now.
think, because I think the target price changed based on where in the city the application is.
Okay.
I don't know.
Sounds good.
Well, it's the goal though that you really wanna talk about.
Yeah.
Oh, the overarching. Okay.
So tell me about the no less than 10 years. Is that a, like industry accepted standard for deed restricted areas? Is there an industry accepted norm?
Starting point.
Okay,
It's a starting point.
I was just curious.
I will tell you that we recently completed a project near Park City, site, that has deed restriction and it's forever.
Well, it's Park City, there's.
I'd like
And
to see at
it's
least
for
20.
certain housing types, right, within the project. This was to just create
Something.
something. And it really is up to you how long you want that to go.
And do at least 20.
But it's just
because
to
I don't
encourage-
feel like the housing crisis is gonna disappear within the next 10. And if we enforce it a little longer, it'll help keep those houses affordable for people 11 years from now.
let me offer this while you think about that comment, and that is this. What would you want? Right? Do you want deed restrictions on your property? And I'm not saying that you don't consider doing it. I'm just saying, like, really, what do you want? As you thought about your first home, how many restrictions did you want? It's just a consideration and something.
Well, and I like there's differentiation with deed restriction and owner occupancy, which I appreciate, because I think a lot of citizens don't understand that. They think they're the same or that they could just always go together. So I think that they can help each other. Is my point.
Why do you buy your first home?
To get into a place where you can have some stability, but if you're in one of those
And-
groups where you
and
can't
build-
afford anything, equity,
And build equity.
right? But if
So
you're
that
in a group where you can't
eventually you
afford it,
can,
you want those deed restrictions to kick out the people who are competing against you. So you do want those, if you're in one of those groups where you can't afford a house, you're going to want those deed restrictions to make it easier for you to get there. Even though you don't gain as much equity because of it, it allowed you in where otherwise you wouldn't have been able to get in. And an appreciation for that fact would allow you to say, okay, I can let the next person in, understanding what it did for me and helping me get into the community. So I do think people would appreciate the fact that they got that and can pass it on to the next group as they move to their next place. It doesn't give them as much, but it helps the next people, and I feel like people who are in those essential workers will recognize that their coworkers are also struggling with the same thing.
And we don't have to set this exact thing right now, right?
No, it's,
This
there's
is
no
the
action on
LS.
it.
So you would, it's just setting the
Right.
standard for it's 10 years or
I just
more.
wanted to get to 20, so 20 years or more.
That's
That's
pretty
my
nice to
input.
propose, yeah.
Yeah, I think we just have to be mindful of how long people actually live in homes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, right, because home type definitely plays into that.
In a starter home.
Yeah.
I'm saying.
Yeah,
But
but-
once you move to that next
Right.
stage.
Depends
you
what
might
interest
say-
rates you.
Yeah. Right.
It keeps it that starter home for multiple sets, whereas
thought-
10 doesn't keep it that way for multiple sets of people.
I bought my home 15 years ago. If 100% I was gonna do that 5 years.
Yeah, I've always been on the 5-year plan, I've never met it, but
Right,
yeah.
So this, just know that this is up for future discussion. Yep, we
Yeah.
we don't have to set that tonight.
I just think, yeah,
Do some research on.
Yeah.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, this is gonna, we're gonna take tonight's feedback and then we'll make the changes that we know about and identify, and then we'll send it out to you to read
Thank
through
you.
and
okay,
So I don't know how popular this is in Harrisville, but it's pretty popular in Utah to buy your first house and plan to live in it long enough so you can buy another house, but keep the first one and rent it, right?
As long as you're not on a first time home buyer loan, it doesn't allow that, and so on.
Right, so this
Yeah.
deed restriction, so
Yeah.
this says, oh, I need to live in this house for 10 years,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. or make
And
it
does the
not a
clock
rental
reset
for the
with the
next
second
people,
owner?
this is going to be a next
Or is it
owner
fixed 10
house.
years? Like, there's these
Yeah.
questions, right?
Yeah.
and then the owner occupancy requirement, we haven't really even given any consideration outside of a hardship. I mean, there's,
Right,
No, I think that's great.
okay.
Because that's a big concern in a lot of our neighborhoods. They don't want investors coming in and buying like a whole side of a street and then they're all rentals.
and the
Nobody
whole
wants
goal
that.
of this is home ownership, not home rentals.
Correct.
And so keeping that, again, with the deed restriction, keeping that
It's very
helps detract from being a rental. And helps them pass it on to the next group for home ownership as they move on to their next one.
So this is the language that we were kind of referring to when we were talking about critical and essential workers, okay?
It
So,
reduces the competition.
priority for the first 30 days.
Yeah.
If you're in that group, you're gonna appreciate that. You've got 30 days before the out of state people that work remote for random places or. You know, the retirees taking over your first time home.
so the critical and essential workers definition included Harrisville residents. We have it listed here as a Harrisville resident who doesn't currently own a home or a first-time home buyer.
Right.
And then it just gives the language if after the 30 days, then it will go just out on the market like a regular home sale.
But that doesn't preclude the fact that those people are still there and available and likely still will receive priority, right?
Right.
Because that's the goal.
So this limitation on initial sales, the initial sale of the property, this means when the developer is after the issuance of the certificate of occupancy and
Okay.
that first initial sale, okay?
Can we put 100%?
100% above the target
No,
price?
just
Oh,
make it-
I was gonna say.
I was like-
I'm gonna put 100% and take out the above.
Even then,
So then
To
it would
meet
just
the
be-
target price exactly.
Yeah, to meet the target price.
In fact, maybe we
exactly.
could give a little background on why this is
Sure.
here.
We can set the
Yeah,
target
So,
price.
so if we do a development agreement and it agrees, we're gonna make houses for 350,000. And then we process the preliminary plat, and then we process the final plat, and then we build roads and utilities. And then we finally get to building a house. We're now like 18 months, maybe 24 months
Right.
since we agreed to the price and what's happening with inflation, what's
Right.
happening. So this is what it's intended to think about, and it's just blank, right?
Right, but if we put a target price and it's higher than what you're expecting to build there, say we set the target price at 350. For example, you gave,
Uh-huh.
and then you say you can do 150% of that. What if we just set the target price at the 150%?
In the first.
Yeah, in the first place.
And I think that's a consideration.
So that way you can say not
It's
above the
built in.
target price. And then when you're a developer coming in, you realize that you've got this time frame and the price is gonna change.
Yeah,
But you, at the end of that, have to hit this price, so you gotta design it for a price, lower than that in order to meet that when you sell it.
Yeah.
So that way you can take
That's the
whatever
idea.
percentage above what you build for.
and we wanna build them, we love
Target
building
price.
homes, and you guys want to have them, right? We just don't want a project that's, oh, dang, we can't build it.
Right,
Because we can't sell it for that price, we can't pay people to take houses,
but
right?
when you start the process, just understand that this is your 150% number. And adjust accordingly.
Can you scroll down just a little bit? So we
Rather
can
than
get more
planning
like
at the
establishment of
beginning.
target
That's
price.
an interesting
Target
idea.
price.
Yeah.
Okay, thank
So
you.
that way, whatever the price that we set in the ordinance is stuck to. And the developers are just understanding that they've got that amount of time and that amount of market fluctuations to adjust what they're holding for. So if we say 400 and you build a $300,000 house, then over that time, you may end up selling it for the 400 we stuck you with. But you were building it for 300 when you started.
so we want to kind of circle back to an earlier, in our effort to kind of move forward too here. We want to circle back to the initial conversation that we had about the land and the price of the land and how that affects the target price.
Yeah.
And establishment of the target price. So we have to identify as part of these proposals, we have to identify what the target price is at the beginning of the process so that we're not losing track of what the goal was in the first place of building the homes and allowing the overlay zone, right? Do we want to dive in deeper than that?
I
So
would be
we'll
really curious. I would love to hear from.
Okay.
From the planning commission on that. And ultimately it would be the city council chiming in, right, and saying, yeah. So what we've seen in the other cities we've been talking to about a similar thing. Is there's a bunch of opinions about this, right? Which is, no, one city said, no, we just want it to be more attainable. They set a threshold of just being 20% below where the surrounding homes are of equal, value. And then another city that we're dealing with said, we want to be the affordable plan, right? Like true moderate income housing, 80% AMI, target. And that's those are the two sides of the spectrum, in my opinion, in a discussion around this. And really, this is a time for you to think and you might even put it into some of your goal, your purpose statement, right? if you really want to say, no, we only want to target, an 80% AMI type of structure? Or do we just want to make sure that we're just bringing down the cost of housing, but it's more just to make it attainable for, for some, but not everyone? It's just a discussion, it's a philosophical one to start. But where do you want to see your housing stock go? Do you want to invite in more families, more of these critical and essential workers, right? By keeping that target price at, say, $400,000, or are you okay with, and I'll give you an example, we are building homes in, we're just actually closing out of the community in Centerville, where those homes are on 7,000-foot lots, and they're about $575,000, which sold fairly well in this market. Not because that's a really great price, it's just pretty attainable for a lot of people, right? But does that go far enough for Harrisville's, desire? Those are just some examples of where do you want to go? What do you want to do?
Well, one of our state definitions is to, encouragement to have units below 450, like for a lot of incentives, like that's been one of the numbers for the last 2 years that we hear in a lot of communities. I'm not saying that needs to be ours, that's just a number that has been established.
If we set a price today, the longer it stays at that price, the more affordable the housing is going to get.
Assuming that house prices continue.
Well, so if we set a price of 450 or 500 or some number, like we were talking just earlier, as the houses are built, the next development that comes in is going to have to plan of cheaper homes relative to the market in order to meet that price. And so you're going to get more affordable homes if you just stick with a price and it doesn't adjust for inflation. Whereas if you do the AMI, people's incomes change and that number fluctuates with it.
Yeah.
Rather than they're, developing with that. And so each development that comes in would have a harder time meeting that number with the same product. And so they'd have to change that more. And so that's one thing to think about too, because as time goes on, if this is in the ordinance for 10 years and we set the price at 450, what kind of house is that going to get you 10 years from now?
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that. So I think what you're saying is the ordinance itself is setting the price.
If we were to, yeah.
Cause I know I thought about it, that the price was set case by case. We looked at a piece of land, they said, show us what it would take to build 400 here. And we've demonstrated, which is part of the process.
That depends on the price of the land so much that it could be very different in the overlay zone from one to the other.
I think the next step in here
Yeah,
will.
Whereas
kind
if
of
we were
highlight
able
clarity.
to set that, then that would give people wanting to buy that property at whatever price, an idea of what type of product they would have to put on it in order to meet that sort of dollar amount, if we could set that in there.
so I think there's kind of two things going on here with the target price. The first one is, yes, that's a very valid point, that if you put in the language of the ordinance that our target price in Harrisville is 450, that's gonna be outdated fairly quickly.
Yeah, or you're
And
going to get a lot of cheaper or more compact houses in
Well-
order to try to meet it.
But, well, I don't even, your density is gonna be, you know,
Either that or
the-
you just won't build it, it won't.
Right.
and that
Right,
was
just
the
be overlay
next
at
thing I
that
was gonna
point.
say is we have to meet in the middle, right? We have to bring the developer to the table, because
Right.
never before in the history of development have the cities ever been involved in how much the land costs for the developer to buy. In consideration of what we're gonna let them build on it.
Right,
It's bringing cities into a realm that we've never played
Yeah.
before. We've never,
It's gonna be awesome.
and do we need to be in that? 'Cause
well, in my opinion, we shouldn't be, but that's the way that the state wants us to be, because they're kind of shoving us this direction.
But if we set a set price that involves us in it in a way where we're not involved in the price of it, because then they just have to design the parcel to that price.
So that's what the intention here is
Right,
that the development, well, let's go for the ordinance being overlaid on a proposed development identifies the target price.
Right,
So to Randy's point, how does that happen? How do we kind of talk about that target price? So in order to apply for this ordinance, the developer is going to submit 2 concept plans at the same time. They're gonna submit the first concept plan that would show by right on this, if I develop this land under what is currently zoned, this is what I could do with this property.
right,
The second concept plan is going to show the attainable concept. So the first one is the base concept, which is the lot count, according to the current standards.
right,
The second concept is gonna show the target price being the goal,
right,
how we're gonna use that property to get to that target price.
right,
It's a total flip the script moment in how we approach housing. It really is. We typically approach it first, right, with just pretty please city, just like, this is what I think I need. This totally says we're gonna focus on the target price, whatever we decide to set. And that's why I was asking, what's your philosophical opinion of it? Because you're gonna be asked in this ordinance, where do you stand, right? And then, but it can be different for any part of the city.
Right.
And you come in and you say, okay, well, what we really want you to hit in this part of the city, right, is a $500,000 home that feels right to us for what we think there is. Then the developer comes and says, okay, I'm gonna go figure out how to solve for that. It's a math equation
right.
rather than arbitrary goals, which at the end of this, I wanna talk to you about.
Where
some
we
things
put
that
in
I've seen,
arbitrary numbers on it.
why this becomes a challenge, but this is very unique, but it also is the first time where we're proposing a collaboration. As far as I can tell in an ordinance, have you ever seen it before, where we say, as developers in a city, let's work together to find the right price for this part of our community.
So I have a question on that. Could we set, instead of saying target price everywhere, do 75% of the median house price at that time? That way we're not arguing over what price it is.
The median house
So the
price in the
target price-
county, the median
No,
house
in the
price
city,
just in the
in the
city.
city. So if you take the median house price in the city, multiply it by 0.8. And say that's the price point for this overlay. So I'm thinking if I do a map and I put the overlay over properties that aren't in a concept right now. If I say the target price for the overlay zone is 0.8 times the current median house price. Then the developer goes out, says the median house price is $700 and some dollars. Multiply that by 0.8, that's my target price right now. That way, as the market changes, the number does, but we're not involved in setting that with every development.
So I would say and you guys can chime in, but I would say the only time the answer to that could be yes, is if the entire city's property was sold at the same price.
Yeah,
If the land cost was the same,
Right,
then I think you could apply a formula like that to say 75%. But the problem that we don't control at the city level,
Right.
and the developers have very little control, to be fair, is the market value of the property,
Right.
the land cost. And so if our goal, we
so do we set
to
it
go
up?
back to the goal of attainability,
We should show you the chart from 1982 to now, the increase in salary versus the increase in price home price. So the median home price went up 700%, while salaries, what, doubled? 400. Yeah, great, so just tons of consideration, so many variables,
Right.
you know, and then you get the median home price, but it's competing against salaries,
Right.
interest
Yeah.
rates, and so many
And
components.
the
right?
very hard thing, and from their point of view is. We can go off median home prices, but we bury land, like they don't have the. Data. As much as they do on home sales of bare land sales,
Right,
and how that's inflated. Even more so than the home prices.
right, but if we say the target price of homes that you're gonna build should meet that, so. If the median house price is $728, you multiply that by 0.8, you get 600,000.
20% reduction.
Or something like that. And then you say, okay, the target price for development is going to be 600,000. You can build however many $600,000 homes on there, but you can't build any $728,000 homes on there. That'll change and it'll adjust the math they have to do to solve for what kind of homes do we have to build there. It keeps it somewhat close to the market price of homes in the area. There aren't any homes on the land, but they can do the math to say, if I buy the land at whatever price it's being offered, I can do the math to see how many homes I could put on there with this overlay.
Question I think becomes, does it meet the goal of critical essential workers, first time home buyers?
And the
middle
take,
class residents?
yeah.
It'd make it more attainable than the median price.
It's more
by
right?
that percentage.
Just right, so one way that we addressed this in another city was we took a standard like you just described, and it said that or more.
Right.
It can be that or more of a reduction based on how the city
Yeah.
council.
At least 20%.
Yeah.
So it gives you a
So
minimum,
that it
And
has
that
a
give you a
minimum
maximum
threshold
target price
That
for
it's
that.
clear, we're gonna lower the price in that area,
Yep.
right, to meet the need. And then you go further if you want.
Yep,
does it,
So I think it's a good philosophical way to just make sure that there's a standard.
and that way we get rid of negotiating that on every one, because they can say, if I have to be less than the median price of homes at that time by this much, that means my home prices have to be this much or less.
Mhm.
So what can I do with the available property to meet that? And it'll be cheaper than the homes that aren't in that overlay by that percentage that we've multiplied the median price by.
I have a couple concerns. One is just restricting it to Harrisville because we are as small as we are.
You know, do the county,
I think the county's more reasonable because I've been on MLS and other services before and there's 3 homes for sale. And so if they vary $600,000, you know, it's not giving you a good median.
right,
Like that's just a 1 for instance.
right,
So, and then if we say, oh, we'll throw out the high and the low, well, then you have 1 home. So that also doesn't give you a natural median.
right.
So I think the county is worth a consideration, but what do you guys think?
I don't know, I think we'd have to draw a section of the county, because there's some areas that are
Yeah.
significantly lower cost.
Yes.
So what I've been writing down here is I've been looking at comps for a number of counties around
Mhm.
Utah, including all of our adjacent counties and so on, just to see if there's a huge amount of variability right now at this moment between November of 2024 and December of 2024. Just to know, you know, how close are the medians to each other, and they're not that far apart, like. Box Elder and Weber, we're within $1,000 of median prices, which I would not have guessed. Davis has less of a median difference than it did 5 to 10 years ago. And so anyway, so I don't know if we would need to do that. I understand your point. I just don't know if we need to. If that's a need.
I like keeping it at the city, but you could do a historical amount of the city for the last, 4 months or something to give you more comps if you needed it.
Or 6 months.
You're gonna wanna do,
But-
I think you're gonna wanna consider a couple of things. Do you still have your map up of your zoning?
The zoning map.
Just curious. So there's a couple of things. If you look at this piece of land right here, right? You smiled, so
I smiled.
so maybe there's
Really
some
close to that.
controversy over
No,
that,
it's
but
fine. I just smiled because I'm close to that.
it's on the edge of your city, right?
Right,
New home targeting what new home construction pricing is sort of a key to this, because that's really what you're setting a true threshold off of, right?
right,
And so what I would suggest is a look at more or less a radius around the parcel in question,
Okay.
right? Because when people are looking for homes, they don't see that line,
Mhm.
right? They're looking for
Look at the
homes
taxes
in an
they pay.
area.
Correct.
And so you're looking at okay, new homes, which is really what's mostly available now versus the resale for obvious reasons. In this area on the base concept, right? So let's say it's 30 acre lots for a minute. Those homes in that area, new home construction, you just take it out far enough that there are some, right? Let's say it meets that $833,000 that I talked about earlier, right? If you look at it as, that's our base. Now we set some standard, right? Of, we want to reduce it by this, but maybe our goal, then let's say it's the 20% that you were talking about, but maybe our goal this time is to take it to, not that, in that case, it would be $650,000. We actually really want to see $500,000, right? It's that's where you're setting the target prices, but first looking at what would this have been, right? And then going from there. That's just a thought. I don't know if that's the right way.
I think that that's a good consideration. I like that you started that section because there is such a difference right there in homes. I'm like, so my street has 10 homes that are 10 to 14 years old. The next street east of us has about 30 homes. If you go down the whole thing in a couple little 30 to 40, and they are all 30 years old. Yep, and then you go another street to the west, they're all 15 years old, built on slab, no basements. Anyway, it's just such in this small area, and home prices reflect that. So.
And to add to
But you
that,
take the median and you add it into the neighborhood.
But if you're focused, in that scenario, right, you're focused largely on the resale.
Mhm.
The problem with that, or a challenge, I guess you'd say, is that the cost to build is so inflated,
Yeah,
right, that you can't compete with existing construction and new construction. So you
Right.
have to look in the comp arena, you really gotta look at new construction and where that is. Cause there's a reason that it's priced as high as it is.
yeah,
So for example, because I looked at these numbers recently in Utah County, the median home price is $580,000,
exactly
right?
what I thought.
But for new home construction in Utah County, it's $664,000. And that's because it costs more, the replacement value, right? If your home burns down and you gotta rebuild.
Yep.
I hope you've increased your insurance recently because the cost to build today is, we actually just looked at these numbers. Since 2020 to our final numbers in 2024, direct cost, so it's only the vertical construction, which it's up 45%.
I believe that 100%.
45% more.
Yeah.
Right, to build today versus that. So when you're looking at comp to establish target price, you really have to look at where's the new home construction pricing and how do we bring that down in the equation? That's what I'm trying to get at when you're creating your base understanding of the price.
Yeah, I get that.
And then you adjust from there. Did I say that okay?
No, I think that was great.
So should we do a mileage from the center of the city? That's our zone.
you're gonna have problems there. And the only reason I say that is because what do you feel on the north end of the city?
Well, the north end of the city is Pleasant View adjacent.
It's North Ogden adjacent,
And North
Pleasant
Ogden
View.
adjacent.
And the south end is Ogden.
Yes, it's so different.
Apartments, yes.
I'm just saying what the feel is, okay? I'm
Yeah.
not saying
No. 'cause
right,
I've-
wrong, or indifferent. That's what it
But
is.
if you include that radius from the center of the city to expand beyond Harrisville a little bit, you'll get a little bit of all of that.
Yes,
Mixed in.
yes, I
And we're
understand.
talking about affordability, not trying to match
get
the
it.
neighbor.
I'm not saying matching, I'm not saying,
Okay.
I'm just saying perspective of people selling land. Price goes up in adjacent to this as opposed as adjacent to that.
Right,
Yep.
That's all I'm saying.
So And again, we don't have to define that tonight. We
Yeah.
don't have to,
No, just things for
we,
consideration.
yep.
We have to
Just
lose
all-
sleep over it,
Yep.
that's what's next.
Yeah.
Just add it to the list of things that
Yeah.
keep my brain running.
So other things that have to be considered in this concept are, and disclosed, I'll use the word disclosed,
Yeah.
is the the developer is going to be talking about per unit cost to the
Mhm.
city and what that product ultimately is going to, including infrastructure costs and the margins on their end. And,
And scope creep, like you mentioned earlier.
Scope.
Yeah, we
Scope
don't
creep,
like
over
it.
time, we know that.
Right,
Scope of the project.
this is
creeps
meant to
up.
create this trusting relationship, right, and so
Uh-huh.
the idea is. We need to show you that we're taking a reasonable profit,
Yeah,
because if it's unreasonable, we can make the home less expensive.
right.
so this is all going to be accompanied by and driven by a development agreement,
Mhm.
okay? It specifies the zone change and the development agreement adoption, and the process that it goes through is identical to a.
Mixed use.
Yeah. Well, or any kind of zone change for
Which
the
means we have
land
a
use.
public hearing.
Planning commission at public hearing and a recommendation to the city council, not adoption. And then a preliminary plat. And adoption goes through the administrative process, just like our subdivision process. Very much like our mixed use does. And the preliminary application requirements, I think I did put those sections in there, but in all.
It just
of our-
follows your standard permit,
Yeah,
plat,
yeah,
and final
I was gonna
plat,
say it,
and,
an approval
Well-
process administratively.
yeah, I think, so Harrisville does preliminary plats approval by planning commission, right?
Right.
Yeah, so just.
Lucky.
Yep.
You guys are building the agenda up, right?
And then the last section is the amendment if there has to be some type of it outlines the process for
Okay.
that. So that's a lot. We've had a large discussion tonight. That's a lot to absorb, a lot to sort through.
Agenda was
And a lot
deceptive, I'm just gonna say.
That's
A
not
single
bad.
item agenda did not.
I already letting them request revisions to final approval.
So some of the circumstances that we talked about are the length of time that it takes to go through development process has been extended. By outside factors that are not controlled by the city or the developer,
Right.
that may.
But once we've
Adversely,
got final approval,
well,
it should be in there.
I would say that. Even the last final approval we did on a plat had to be amended.
Yeah.
For a billboard sign, for heaven's sakes, and the trees had to be removed, but we had to go through that amendment process. So this just identifies that we know. That amendments are going to be made to some of these plans, and it outlines the process to do that.
Great,
Not encouraging it to happen,
but
just
allowing
saying
there to
Right,
be.
right.
there's likely gonna have, yes, an
Yeah.
acknowledgement that
Right.
this is
A lot line
gonna happen.
Probably might happen again.
I'm so sorry.
Too soon.
So, yeah, I know that we become semi-unproductive after too much time of discussion. So I would encourage you to consider all the notes that you have. We'll try and turn this around, we don't have another planning commission meeting until February. But we'll try and turn this around in time for you to have
Yeah.
time, appropriate time for review. So we'll give you more than just the posting time frame. We'll send it out 2 weeks before the meeting so that you have some time to review it, take your own notes and come back.
I'd say if you have ideas, like, as you look at this, just send them to Jenny and just.
Some ideas.
I mean, you're welcome to send them to us too, but typically, yeah.
Track your comments, track whatever, send them the copies back to, it'll likely be Brandon. I'm just sitting in tonight because he was unavailable.
Right.
Yeah, he's not here.
Anyway,
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd love to see this beat the state legislation.
Except then they'll take this and say, we want this plus, and add something into it and pay it to everyone. Cause if we have it before, then they can consider it when they're making the rules.
Maybe,
We don't wanna rush anything that's at this magnitude through any process in the
Right.
city.
Yeah.
We wanna take our time and
Mhm.
we also wanna be very mindful of your time in reviewing it.
Right,
We, maybe based on how many comments staff receives back from you all, we'll either set another work session so we can have another casual discussion.
Mhm.
Or a public hearing, whatever the next step, because it'll go through all the same processes. So we'll just let you
It'd be interesting to hear the public's comments on this one.
take some time on it. And review that, okay? Anything else, final wrap up, things you want for their consideration?
Yeah, if you don't mind, so because I just sat through, a 2-hour work session with Lehigh City Council last night over this. And there's a couple things that happened in the process, so I've actually been working on, that's my own city, is Lehigh City, and this got presented to them a year ago. And it's been a year and we don't have anything adopted, right? So one is, this could take a long time if you let it.
Right.
The other one is what I saw happen last night was what was unfortunate, right? Fear set in. And when fear sets in, arbitrary rules show up. And I'm especially sharing this with you because it actually, Cameron Deal was at the meeting, sat right behind me. We had a nice conversation afterward. But the mayor kind of took over the ordinance, right, and put some rules in it. And some of those additional rules are, they created a density cap, so to speak, right? They just said, we want, you can have a bonus density of 50% if you do these things, which they also said, we're gonna dictate the price in the ordinance, right? Right, and give you a 50% increase in density to get there. The issue with that is it's just like, there's no math associated with it. There's no reason. It was just, here's a rule we're gonna put into the ordinance. What I want you to think about as you think about what I want here, I want you to just consider whatever that rule is, if you decide to add something more or an additional condition.
Something Harrisville specific.
That it needs to be something that you can, that will not disincentivize.
Yeah.
So in that case, it disincentivizes the developer because they don't know if that rule will work or not work.
Right.
This one is still at the discretion of your city council. And it just says to the developer, just come and present to me what will work. We're not gonna give you the parameters because we need to know what it will take. That's the difference. And I say that because fear sets in that, oh my gosh, they're gonna probably present something that is more dense than we want. Well, that's true, but also because in Lehigh's case, they said, we want a $328,000 home, right? Now, if you go to that extreme, right, it almost doesn't matter what density you go to, because it also is targeted on single family homes. In Lehigh, the average acre price, right, is over $500,000 an acre. Just do the math. You can't actually solve for it. So don't make arbitrary rules. Make sure that whatever you come up with has a path that will create the incentive for the conversation.
If we put the price too low, we're gonna be targeting mobile home parks with this, which would increase affordability, but it's not necessarily what our city wants.
Right. So just know that, and my understanding is that the city, Lehigh City is gonna go to the League of Cities and Towns on the Monday meeting, if you're planning on attending or listening, and they're gonna present that. And they're gonna present it as a great idea. And I'm telling you right now, it's a disincentive. They took the basis of this code and then they're gonna make it not achievable. Just don't do that.
Yeah, we don't wanna rush, like you said, but I also, there's no reason for this to take an inappropriate length of time.
Right.
Yeah, Yeah.
So keep those things in mind, just like, let's move forward, let's, and don't, even though you won't be able to solve all of the unknowns, don't let that stop you from figuring out something.
Yeah.
Cause this is the single most important thing I think that you can be doing, and I commend you for sitting here and spending 2 hours.
Yeah.
Talking about it, cause my gosh, like, I got a daughter who turns 21 on Sunday. And I think I've said it to you before, like, I work for a home builder and I won't be able to build her a home that she can afford, right? And that's the state of the market right now. The way we correct that is by the decisions you make today. Right, what you decide today, it's gonna take at least 3 or 4 years before you see the fruits of it. You gotta act now, because in 3 or 4 years.
Or you
it's not just where are we gonna be then? It's not gonna be where we're at today, it's gonna be higher.
And I think it's important to remember too, that this is not gonna solve the housing crisis.
No.
But it's gonna help.
It's gonna move things.
So. If you look at this in the eyes, like, is this gonna fix the problem? It's just not gonna work. It's meant to be collaborative, like, you say your price, let us show you what it takes to get there. You're like, we just don't like that. What if the price was just a little bit more? How could we fix this and this and this, right? And you get this back and forth until you get this community you love at a price point that makes sense, and it's gonna be awesome. This is a paradigm shift. This is cool stuff.
And we already have the mechanism in place in Harrisville because we use this process for our mixed use developments. So we already are becoming very familiar with having meetings with developers in our project management meeting where they give the proposals and they talk about their concepts. And so we already have in place the mechanism to move something like this through our process, where a lot of cities are still delayed in some of their subdivision ordinances and things and approvals from the state. So we're excited. We have been talking as a group with the planning group and the project management and staff members for months before we even brought it to you. Talking through what we feel like the vision of Harrisville based on information and the feedback that we've gotten from you in past discussions. And we were comfortable to come and have this discussion with you tonight. So we hope that, nothing is set in stone. We haven't finalized anything. We just want to get your eyes on it and you're thinking about it. And this is, we feel like a pretty good start to where we think we can
Thank you
go.
for all your hard work.
So 2 weeks from our next meeting, we'll have it so we can go through and edit it and give you more stuff.
Yeah, we'll set that as a goal that your next meeting will
And if you
be.
can't get it from that, then send it 2 weeks before the one after that. We have some time to go through it, depending on how long it takes you guys to
Yeah,
make this thing perfect.
your next meeting will be
The 12th.
the 12th of February. So we'll try, I don't see why we couldn't have it by the end of January. Out to you,
Perfect.
maybe even earlier, depending on what other things we follow up with.
There's
based on
no
this.
follow-up on our agenda, so I can't even go to that. So I'm just going to declare us adjourned. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks for letting us be part of the discussion.
Yeah, it's true, really.
Thanks for your feedback.